Rent is $400 a month. Incredible. Except there's no power for 12 hours a day, the water coming out of your tap can put you in a hospital bed, and nobody mentioned either one in the retirement video that sold you on the place. This is the video nobody making cheap retirement content wants to make, because rent numbers get clicks and grid data doesn't. But you didn't ask for rent numbers. You asked for the real cost of living somewhere when the lights go out and stay out. Today, 7 countries, ranked from manageable annoyance to you need a generator just to keep your insulin cold. Stay until number 1, because it's a country in genuine humanitarian crisis right now, not 5 years ago, right now. This data comes from national grid operators, the CDC's travel health guidance, recent wire service reporting, and on-the-ground expat accounts published this year, not outdated best places to retire listicles, recycling the same 5 bullet points since 2019. The Philippines earned its spot on our earlier quote-unquote best islands list, and it still deserves a place there. But in 2026, the country declared a full national energy emergency. A global oil shock tied to the Strait of Hormuz crisis cut deep into the Philippines' fuel supply, since the country imports the overwhelming majority of its oil. The result? Rolling brownouts across Luzon and the Visayas, red and yellow grid alerts multiple times a week, and a state of local emergency declared in several provinces and cities. The deeper issue, the Philippines is 7,000 islands connected by undersea cables. Damage one cable, and an entire province goes dark with no backup route, since most island corridors are single connections, not redundant loops. Rural areas already lose power to, quote, right-of-way issues. Overgrown vegetation shorting out lines during windy weather. Water-wise, the CDC lists the Philippines among destinations where tap water isn't reliably safe, particularly outside major resort infrastructure. Bottled or filtered water is standard practice for residents and visitors alike. The unspoken cost. A basic battery power bank capable of running a fan and a laptop through a multi-hour brownout runs roughly $300 to $500. A real backup system with solar capacity starts around $1,800 and climbs past $10,000 for whole home coverage. Verdict: livable with planning, especially in Cebu or Metro Manila with established backup infrastructure. But budget for batteries from day one, not as an afterthought. From a country managing a crisis to one that's been quietly unreliable for decades. Roatan made our islands list for its diving and its low visa bar. What that video didn't dwell on, Honduras' state electric company, ENEE, has run at a chronic financial deficit for years, with transmission losses from theft, illegal connections, and billing failures eating into reliability nationwide. A 2019 regional grid failure knocked out power to all 9 million residents simultaneously, and aging infrastructure means storm season remains a near-guaranteed outage trigger, particularly on the mainland feeding power to the Bay Islands. Tap water across Honduras sits on the CDC's unsafe list without exception. Bottled water, boiling, or filtration is mandatory, not optional, for residents. The unspoken cost. Most expats on Roatan budget $40 to $80 a month for bottled or filtered water alone, plus a small generator, typically $400 to $800, just to keep refrigeration running through routine outages. Verdict: workable for retirees who treat backup power and filtered water as fixed monthly line items, not emergencies. Move to the mainland, and the dependency problem gets worse, not better. Belize sells itself on being English-speaking and laid back, What it doesn't advertise? The country generates roughly 30% of its own electricity and imports the rest from Mexico's national utility, CFE. When Mexico's supply tightens, Belize's grid operator sheds load, and Belize has no domestic buffer to fall back on. And it's not just power. In documented cases, a transmission fault and a broken water main hit Belize City simultaneously, leaving residents without electricity and without running water for the better part of a day, since water pumping in much of the country depends directly on grid power. When the lights go, the taps frequently follow. Belize's tap water is on the CDC's avoid list for travelers, and that applies to residents too, particularly outside Belize City and San Pedro. The unspoken cost. A household generator covering a fridge, fans, and a router runs $500 to $900, and a basic gravity or carbon block water filter system runs $150 to $300 up front, with periodic filter replacement after that. Verdict: fine for retirees who treat the power water link as a package deal, since when one fails here, the other usually follows. But dependency on a neighbor is one problem. A grid that's never recovered from its own crisis is a different level entirely. Nicaragua is the cheapest country on this list, and the grid reflects it. The country suffered a multi-year crisis with 4 to 12-hour blackouts affecting nearly the entire nation, and distribution losses, electricity stolen or lost before it reaches a meter, remain among the highest in Central America. The grid has stabilized since its worst years thanks to diesel and renewable additions, but the underlying fragility, aging lines, weak revenue collection, heavy dependence on imported fuel, hasn't gone anywhere. Tap water is unsafe across virtually the entire country, with the CDC recommending bottled or treated water without exception. The unspoken cost. Most long-term expats in Leon or Grenada keep a propane or gas backup for cooking, specifically because electric stoves become useless mid-outage, with monthly propane refills running $15 to $25 plus a generator in the same $400 to $800 range as Honduras. Verdict: the cheapest rent on this list comes with the least forgiving infrastructure. Plan accordingly. Now we leave Central America, because the next three countries aren't dealing with chronic neglect. They're dealing with active, ongoing collapse. The DR is crushing tourism records, and Punta Cana's resort zones run on industrial-grade backup power most visitors never notice. Step outside that bubble, and the picture changes fast. In February 2026, a transmission failure plunged large parts of the country, including the capital, into a total blackout, the second nationwide collapse in 3 months. Outside of major emergencies, routine outages of up to 10 hours are simply part of life in many areas, caused by a transmission and distribution system that's been deteriorating since the 1980s, with large voltage swings and an aging grid that energy officials themselves describe as lacking redundancy. Drinking water sits squarely on the CDC's unsafe list outside resort filtration systems. The unspoken cost. Condo buildings outside resort zones commonly run diesel generators with a shared monthly fee of $30 to $60 per unit, while standalone houses need their own setup, typically $800 to $1,500 for a mid-size unit plus fuel. Verdict: resort zone living insulates you from most of this. Anywhere else, generator access isn't a luxury, it's infrastructure. If the Dominican Republic is occasional collapse, our next country had the actual disaster movie version of this crisis, and the risk of a repeat hasn't disappeared. Ecuador made our retirement visa list for its $1,446 a month threshold and its dollarized economy. Here's the part that video didn't cover. Roughly three-quarters of Ecuador's electricity comes from hydroelectric dams, and in 2024, the worst drought in 61 years drained those reservoirs dry. Blackouts stretched to 14, and in some regions up to 20 hours a day, for months. Hospitals lost monitoring equipment, oxygen concentrators failed, the economic toll ran into billions of dollars. The government has since added a 200-megawatt hydro plant and leased floating Turkish power barges as backup, and as of early 2026, the worst-case scenario hasn't repeated. But the structural vulnerability is unchanged. When the rain doesn't come, the lights don't stay on, and the country's biggest single hydro plant still carries known construction defects. Ecuador's tap water is also generally unsafe outside filtered systems, with most expats relying on bottled or filtered water as standard. The unspoken cost? A UPS battery backup for routers and medical equipment runs $150 to $300, and most serious expats in Cuenca or Quito now keep a generator on hand regardless of season, adding $500 to $1,000 to your move-in budget that nobody mentions in the visa breakdown. Verdict: the visa math is real and the savings are real, but so is a hydro grid, one bad dry season away from 2024 again. And now, the one that isn't a cautionary tale about the past. It's happening today. Cuba's national grid collapsed completely at least 4 times in a single year, and as of spring 2026, the country is generating roughly 1,278 megawatts against demand of nearly 3,000. That's a deficit of over 1,700 megawatts every single day. One blackout in March 2026 lasted 29 hours straight. Oil imports, the fuel that runs Cuba's aging thermal plants, dropped to effectively zero in January 2026 after supply chains from Venezuela and Mexico both broke down. This isn't a power problem anymore, it's a cascading systems failure. Without electricity, water pumps stop, meaning no running water during outages, on top of no power. Refrigeration and medication storage fail. Residents have taken to cooking over open firewood in city streets. Protests have broken out in Havana, met with police response. The U.S. Embassy has issued active security alerts describing the grid as increasingly unstable. One more thing most retirement content conveniently skips. U.S. travel and financial restrictions to Cuba remain in force, meaning this isn't a realistic retirement option for most Americans regardless of the infrastructure question. We're including it because Cuba shows up constantly in, quote, cheapest places to live searches and comment sections, and the honest answer is that right now, it belongs nowhere near that list. Verdict: not a budgeting problem, a humanitarian crisis, and no rent number changes that. Seven countries, 7 different versions of the same warning. The Philippines, manageable with backup batteries, but currently mid-crisis. Honduras, decades of underinvestment behind the Postcard. Belize, dependent on a neighbor's grid for most of its power. Nicaragua, the cheapest rent paired with the least forgiving infrastructure. The Dominican Republic, resort zone comfort masking nationwide grid fragility. Ecuador, a hydro system one drought away from repeating its worst year. And Cuba, a genuine crisis happening in real time, not a cautionary tale from the past. None of this means don't move abroad. It means budget for a generator the same way you'd budget for rent, and never trust a country's water until you've checked it yourself, not the brochure. If you want the full breakdown of which of these countries still make financial sense once you add generator, propane, and filtration costs into the monthly total, that video's linked right now. One last thing. Infrastructure failures are inconvenient. Safety failures are dangerous. Next time, we're covering which of these same popular retirement destinations carry active State Department warnings you need to read before you sign a lease, not after.